Hello, everyone. I'm Lauren Conlon with Pop Crime TV's The Outlier podcast. And I have been looking forward to this interview with Hazel Thornton, a Menendez juror from the first trial, for a very long time. Hazel, I have been hitting you up on every form of social media possible. So for that, I apologize. But Hazel is the author of multiple books, but to keep things relevant, I'm going to plug her one book, which she actually kept as a diary during the trial. It's incredible, but it's called Hung Jury: The Diary of a Menendez Juror, and it's linked out in the episode notes. But Hazel, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I ignored your requests until I heard one of your podcast episodes and I liked it.
Oh, wait, you're so funny. Right. So I completely understand you have to vet everybody and see if they're going to be respectful because this is very delicate. This subject matter is delicate, and I know where you stand. Yeah. And I have a lot of questions, but the documentary, it's called The Menendez Brothers. It's out now on Netflix, and you are in it. And I thought you did a wonderful job of painting a picture of what it was like to be in that deliberation room. And I've heard you do other interviews where you had said it's a battle of the sexes, or it was a battle of the sexes. And I have some questions, but I first just want to set the scene for everybody. You lived in Los Angeles, in California, in the 90s. What were you doing that you were able to take 5 months of your life and dedicate it to this trial?
I was working for the phone company. A lot of the jurors were phone company employees and post office government workers, people from companies that were in the habit of allowing their employees to participate in jury duty and paying them their full salary while they were doing it.
Wow.
Others were retired. Not a lot of people could take that much time off if they weren't one of the two.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I'm like, 5 months, my gosh. And
Well, for me, for the jurors, it was 7 months because it took a month to select the jury. So a month of jury selection,
Yeah.
and then 5 months of testimony, and then a month of deliberations.
Right. Wow. So yeah, 7 months total. Holy moly, it's almost a year. My gosh. Uh, and you mentioned when you walked in the courtroom, you were thinking, well, and I don't remember, this might have been another documentary, but you were like, this can't be the Menendez brothers. This was years ago. And then you saw Eric. I mean, I guess I'm wondering here, how were you able to not be biased? I mean, this was all over the media. It was all over the news.
Well, we had to fill out jury questionnaires and say how much we knew about the trial. And I agree. I'd read it in People magazine. I mean, there was almost nobody who'd never heard of it.
Right.
And so there were a lot of questions about your feelings about, domestic abuse and the death penalty. We were all what they considered death qualified. And we never got that far, but I was like, well, I'm just going to follow the law. I'm not going to try to sway this one way or another. And
Yeah.
I'm just going to answer the questions honestly. And if they pick me, they pick me.
So when they picked you and you were in that courtroom and you saw Eric and Lyle walk in, what were you thinking, Hazel?
Oh, well, a famous quote of mine from my book is that my blood ran cold because I had never seen a killer. I mean, everybody knew or thought they knew that they had killed their parents. What we didn't know was why. And that's what I learned during the trial.
Right. Why. So I want to get to that moment because I feel like you went into this, you're listening to the different testimony and you're listening to the state put on their case, and then you see the defense. And all of a sudden there's this bombshell. Now, this must have been shocking to you guys. You must have all been, I mean, I would imagine that I would be squeezing somebody's leg next to me that I didn't even know, being like, are you hearing this? I mean, what were you thinking during this testimony?
Well, they laid it out during opening arguments what we were going to hear. So by the time they actually started presenting their case, it wasn't such a shock, but we hadn't known what the why was until opening statements.
Right. But I just feel like that testimony was graphic. I mean, it was heartbreakingly graphic. And I guess that's what I mean. Hearing somebody in real life talk about this stuff, it must have been just so traumatic and painful for you guys to listen to.
It was very emotional. Lyle was the first of the brothers to take the stand and tell his story. And you could have heard a pin drop in the courtroom. Every audience member, every juror, there were 2 juries in the courtroom at the time. And because I was on Eric's jury and not Lyle's, I was in the audience while Lyle's jury was in the jury box while he was testifying.
Okay.
And it was emotional for everyone. I had to try to, at all times during the entire trial, think, okay, are these people lying or are they telling the truth? And is he lying? Is he telling the truth? And my conclusion was he's either the best actor I've ever seen in my life or he's telling the truth.
Right.
And it wasn't just the testimony, though. People ask me, what made you believe them? Well, it was partly the words they said and the way they said them.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also the 50 plus witnesses who testified on their behalf during the trial, including expert witnesses, psychologists and therapists and
right.
Yeah.
I mean, I've literally been talking about, it was this morning I was talking to somebody, I was arguing with them because I still, and I mean, I love people's differing opinion. I really do. But I try to support my own opinion with facts. And these facts are Dr. Vickery, for example. He treated Eric for so long. How is one supposed to keep this up for so long? And how are they supposed to be consistent if it's not truthful? And then you have Lyle, who was fighting tooth and nail to keep the secrets from coming out because he was so ashamed. I think he even said he would rather, quote unquote, lose the trial than have their family secrets come out. And that is like, okay, wow. And then something else I have been thinking of recently, and I don't know if you agree with this, but it's been 35 years. The brothers were separated for 21 years. People that don't believe that they were being truthful about the abuse, don't you think that it would have come out by now and one of the brothers would have flipped on one another and maybe blamed the other one? Or do you know what I'm saying?
I just do.
Yeah.
Even when the trial ended, I always said if you took sex out of the equation, there were so many other forms of abuse that that the story was believable to me, that they were in fear of their parents. But also, it was never up to the defense to prove abuse. It was up to the prosecution to prove the elements of murder. Right. And every piece of evidence that they had was circumstantial, such as buying guns. Well, were they premeditating a murder, or were they planning in case they needed to defend themselves? Right.
Right.
And post-crime spending. Well, was that their ultimate goal so they could go spending money? Yeah. Or was that a way of dealing with the stress of what was going on? Even Lyle in this current documentary says they were in a fog of emotions. And Eric says he was covering the pain of even being alive at that point in time, during that period of time. So if all you have is circumstantial evidence, the people say, oh, circumstantial evidence isn't evidence. Well, yes, it is. Circumstantial evidence is evidence. Mm-hmm. And the judge said constantly, if you have 2 reasonable explanations for a piece of evidence, a piece of circumstantial evidence, you are to go with the explanation that points to innocence, not with the explanation that points towards guilt.
Right. Yeah, totally. And I think for me, one thing that I had a hard time with the with the story is the fact that, and I don't know how accurate this is because I have to go back and read the transcripts, but I don't necessarily believe that that night they felt like their lives were in danger. Like if they didn't act, their parents were going to kill them. I felt like they had it. When Jose Menendez allegedly said, "Eric, wait for me up in your room," they were like, "Oh, hell no. We are not doing this. We need to do something about this." I don't think they necessarily thought their parents were plotting to kill them that night. Do you agree with that?
Do you believe that their parents may have been plotting to kill them at some point in time?
That I'm not sure. I have a hard time with that because Jose was so obsessed with this outer appearance of his family that I'm
Well,
not sure.
that's the reason they were afraid, is because they were threatening to expose him. And
Right.
So
Right.
whether the parents were ever planning to kill them, they obviously weren't planning to kill them at that moment.
Yeah.
But that's the whole theory of the first case. It's called imperfect self-defense. And that's what was not allowed for the second trial jury to even consider.
Oh yeah, that I can't. When I talk about the second trial, I get upset. I mean, and just to put it in perspective, for me, it's like just Diddy, for example. Diddy, I don't care what happens to him. I think he's a piece of shit. I think he's guilty, but I'm having a hard time because I don't think he's going to get a fair trial. And I just feel like, we live in the United States and everybody is entitled to a fair trial based on the Constitution. He's already being tried in the media. That's my whole thing. I think he's guilty though. But with the Menendez brothers, it's like the second trial, it blows my mind what went down. And I tweeted something last night because I thought I knew all the details, Hazel. I really did. But I did not know that Judge Weisberg did not give the second jury murder 2 or manslaughter. I mean, hello. Of course they deliberated in an hour. The brothers admitted to doing this. So if you give them murder and not guilty, well, what the hell are they going to pick? But
and if you compound that by the prosecution saying there's no evidence of abuse when the evidence of abuse wasn't allowed to be presented, that's
yeah. And think about this. I mean, the penalty phase, you see cases now where they fly in somebody's first grade teacher just to paint a picture of what went on in their brain and why they maybe committed this crime to preserve their life. And they didn't even get that. And that is another thing that blows my mind, why I felt like their second trial was just unconstitutional. But I want to ask you, Leslie Abramson, she is a force. She is brash. And lawyers are not necessarily supposed to affect the jury. If you like the lawyer, if you don't like the lawyer, it shouldn't really matter. But I have to wonder, Hazel, did any of the men on the jury or the women express any disdain for Leslie that might have reflected poorly on Eric?
I do not recall any particular big, long discussions about Leslie in deliberations. But I don't know very many men who did like her at that time.
Yeah, right.
And whether you like an attorney or not, you're, like you said, it shouldn't be about the attorney.
No.
But the way they present themselves, the way they present the evidence either has to, click with you or not click with you. And everything she said made sense to me.
Right. I mean, she cared. It was very clear that she cared. She said she would adopt them at one point. But I couldn't help but think about that. And I know in the show Monsters on Netflix, I felt like there was that one scene. It was really inappropriate because that just wouldn't happen. That if a juror said to a lawyer, "Oh, we voted this because of you," I would go straight to the judge and be like, "Boom, new trial based on this."
Yeah,
so, yeah, that was bullshit.
I don't think that happened.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, so much didn't happen, I feel like, in that show. But
it certainly wasn't me saying
yeah. Well, so back to the witnesses. Who do you think, besides Lyle, let's say, and Eric, who do you think was the strongest witness for the defense? And who do you think was maybe the weakest?
Oh, I don't know about the weakest for the defense, but the strongest, in addition to the expert witnesses, they were very strong.
Mm,
In particular, the one I always think of is Ann Burgess.
yeah.
She gave us, what amounted to she and others gave us what amounted to a college level course in child development and how it affects how abuse affects children and how their brains develop and how, but she also talked about the elements of the crime,
Yeah.
a disorganized crime versus an organized crime. And disorganized implies a killing out of fear. But even more possibly
Interesting.
convincing were the aunts. The whole family, but the Jose's sister
Marta. Yeah.
and Kitty's sister.
Hmm.
I remember thinking, if my brother, if my niece, if my nephews killed my brother, would I be testifying on, and if I thought they were evil, greedy, rich little brats,
Yep.
would I testify on their behalf? No, I would not. I don't think I would. But because they did, and because they were so convincing, that helped make me believe their story.
Yeah.
And
And
and even to this day, the family members want them released. They've never changed their minds either about the truth of the story.
right. Because they saw maybe not the sexual abuse, but they saw that abuse firsthand. And for
They
me,
they saw the other forms of abuse, and they saw evidence that supported the sexual abuse,
yes.
such as Kitty not letting family members down the hall when Jose had one of the boys behind closed doors, for example.
And I mean, it's sick. It's tragic. And I think this is also where if you get in an argument with somebody about, let's say, not their guilt or innocence, but people will bring up Kitty and they'll say, well, how do you justify, quote unquote, Lyle reloading, going in there and shooting his mother in the face? That is savage and that is brutal. How does one justify that? And, my answer to that is, well, you can't necessarily justify it, right? You can't justify it. They are serving time because of this. However, as a mother, my son's almost 6 years old. That's when it started for them. I could just start sobbing thinking about allowing somebody to abuse my baby. I mean, it makes me want to. Sorry, I won't get. I don't want to promote violence, but it's just like, how could you do that? How, and your own flesh and blood. So while there's no justification for murder, that's how I justify it. I'm just, wondering what you guys were thinking.
I think that's partly why it was so much more easy for women back in the day to believe their story than for men to, because women have been the subject of violence more often than men have, and they can relate to the maternal feelings that you just expressed. And things have changed a whole lot in 30 years. I think if they were tried again today, that it would be a different story.
Yeah, definitely. And who did you feel like this state brought any very strong witnesses to the stand that you were like, oh,
No,
okay. No?
that's part of the problem, is that their star witness,
Oh,
Dr. Oziel,
right.
was so full of crap and so thoroughly discredited that he lost his license and was not even brought back for the second trial at all.
Yeah. And that was their star witness.
Yes.
And was Judalon Smith that nutty in person when she was testifying?
Yes.
She was. Were you guys just like, what the hell is happening here?
It
You
was
guys
like it was like watching a soap opera for a living.
and that was all on the state, right? That was all part of the state.
Right. Right.
Okay.
Those-
Yeah. I mean, I feel like they thought they had this in the bag. They were just like, okay, this
They
is easy.
did.
Yeah.
They thought it was a slam dunk case. They
Yeah.
completely underestimated the jury's intelligence, and they only presented circumstantial evidence and terrible witnesses and no contradictory expert witnesses.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay. Well, I'm thinking about this and when you guys were in the deliberation room and the men wanted murder and the women wanted manslaughter, and this might sound like a dumb question, but why couldn't you guys agree maybe on murder too, which is a minimum of 15 years?
Because we didn't think the women didn't think that the prosecution had proven the elements of murder. So we're not going to vote for murder. We're not going to compromise on something that we didn't believe was proven.
Right. Even it, I mean, I don't, and that's why I mean, like, I don't know if it sounds dumb, but I feel like, and maybe it's because we can see the future, right? We know what the future held. So I'm thinking, like, okay, well, why can't you sit in there and be like, okay, let's just agree on murder too? Because
we did discuss it.
yeah.
And we did discuss a compromise. There
Okay.
weren't enough men who wanted to come down from murder one, even.
Wow, really? So
Yeah.
it was that they were like, no, this is it. And they felt like they were lying. That was their impression, that these guys were lying, and that's it.
Yeah. They
Okay.
thought, because Lester Kuriyama, he was the prosecutor for we heard, okay, during the trial, probably 90% of the testimony was heard by both juries.
Mhm.
So we heard a lot of Pamela Bozanich.
Yeah.
But Lester Kuriyama was the prosecutor specifically for Eric.
Right.
And so he gave Eric's closing arguments. He threw two things into the closing arguments that are not considered evidence. One is that his theory of the case was that Eric was gay, and that's how he was able to describe homosexual acts, and that was the whole problem in the family.
That was my next question for you. Wow. Continue. Sorry. Wow.
And that consumed the bulk of our deliberations for a month.
That pisses me off.
It pisses me off
Yeah,
too.
I know. I'm just shocked. Yeah.
And he also threw in there that we'd be gullible to buy the defense. And I think the men were feeling pressure, even though we weren't to, consume news outside of the courtroom about the case. It was nearly impossible. And I'm not saying who I think might have heard what outside of the courtyard,
Yeah.
the court. But I think that they were feeling pressure to not appear to be gullible by the public, which is exactly what the women were accused of being by the public afterwards.
Yeah. No, in your book you talk about almost being bullied. If they wanted you to appear on talk shows or radio shows. And I mean, and I'll get there, but I was curious, and I, just in case I missed it, because I tried to rewatch a lot of the trial, but I sped it up a little bit because it's very long. But I was curious, did they try to bring Eric's sexuality into it before the closing argument, or like did they kind of
The only allusions to his sexuality were that Jose was calling him names, and which I don't care to say, but that's not evidence that he actually was gay.
No.
And but he had girlfriends, and I'm not saying, and he says he's not gay. Right. So I don't have any evidence that he is, even now.
Right. I just don't think it matters. I mean, that's why.
And it doesn't matter.
Right. Well, I guess I was just confused about this because, and I'm thinking about it, and as a young child, when you're introduced to these devious acts, assaults, I get, at such a young age, I can imagine that it really, really must screw with your head. It really must. So regardless of whatever his sexuality is, I mean, it to me, it just didn't matter. And I felt like, I know that it was a different time. The 90s were so different, but it felt super invasive, just very invasive. And again, you commit murder, I guess you have a handful of your rights taken away, and you're going to be in that spotlight feeling like that. But I just wanted to know if that affected you guys at all, but it sounds like it affected the men. Yeah. Wow. And so just going back to you being asked to go on talk shows and radio shows and everything, and getting some bullying. I mean, do you feel like you got your point across to anyone when you were doing those interviews in, 1994 or whatever it was?
Not really.
Yeah.
That's why I didn't talk about it for 20 years. So what happened was, I had kept this journal at home as a way of dealing with the stress of the trial, because we weren't able to talk about it with anyone outside the courtroom or even inside. We weren't to discuss it in the jury room either until it was time for deliberations. So, it's hard to go, 6 months without discussing such a thing with anybody. So I kept a journal at home, and that was in addition to, we kept courtroom notes. I have courtroom notes that have not been published, and I don't plan to publish them. But the journal is what I kept at home in the evening after the days of trial. So what was I getting at? I was getting at, what was your question?
No, the bullying. And I wanted to know if you got your point across to anybody.
So I was convinced to publish my journal, and that happened in 1985 and is a whole story. And then OJ happened. So the few books that had been published sold out, and then nobody cared about Menendez at all after OJ happened.
Right.
So I didn't talk about it for 20 years because well, first of all, there were no podcasts. I love podcasts because I can complete my thought. I can go back to another thought. I can introduce thoughts. And if I pick a good podcast host, they'll listen and they'll have things to say that they've learned. But for 20 years, there were no podcasts. It was hard to talk about without being able to say, go read my book, because I can't sum anything up in a soundbite. There's just no way. So it was super frustrating and traumatizing to even try. And so I knew people in my life 20 years later who had no idea. I had moved since then. They had no idea I had ever been on that trial, and were shocked to find out 20 years later that I'd
be like, girl, what? Like, that's not what you lead with.
But it's not something you lead with when you move to a new place,
You're right. So I forget, because I'm in the crime world. I'm like, lead with that. That's the most interesting thing you could ever say to me. But sorry, continue.
And if your book is still out of print, so once I revised it and put it back out there, it was easier for me to talk about.
Right.
And interest was renewed in the case. Around 2017 is when 2016 is when I revised the book, and things really picked up in 2017 with Law and Order True Crime, and there was a new documentary that year too.
Yes, and I read the beginning that you added from 2016, and it's so cool that you also narrate your own book, and Robert Rand is a part of it. I think that's amazing. I'm literally almost done with his book, and I think I'm going to interview him hopefully after you. But it's just funny because I forget sometimes that people don't know what we know about. I mean, you know everything about it, but about the trial, but I don't have it in me sometimes to start this argument with people who say, well, they're guilty. And I'm just like, my God, no shit. Nobody's saying they're not. It's a whole thing. And you make so much sense, because it's just not that simple. Nobody is condoning murder, right? Yes, I understand the argument. Many people get abused. They don't commit murder.
And the flip side is they're innocent. People don't understand that there were two juries in the first trial. People forget what the difference is between the two trials. There's no way for everybody to know everything.
No.
But it's super frustrating to talk about. It can be.
Right. And that's what I want to say. I want to be like, no, they deserve to be punished. They committed murder, a double murder. That was brutal and savage, and they are being punished. However,
or manslaughter, if you will.
Manslaughter. Yes. There you go. And that's my point, where it's like trying to explain this to people is really, really hard. And it's funny. My dad, I can't believe my dad, who's like just old school. He's like, nah, they need to be released. I'm like, wow. I mean, right. So I do think people are catching on. And additionally, Hazel, a big part of this on why they should be released is because it seems like, I don't know them personally, but they have been rehabilitated. They are doing amazingly well in prison.
They are.
While running a support group. And it's like they're not these violent guys.
They're assets to their they're in a prison community that you have to earn your way into, and they're assets to their prison community.
Right. And have you spoken to either of them or communicated with them in the last 30 years?
Well, yes, but not often and not always directly. I know I am in direct contact with people who talk to them every day.
Yeah. Wow. And can you share anything about, I guess, their day-to-day in prison or any of their ups and downs, just for people who are concerned for them?
Well, they probably wouldn't want me to share their downs.
Yeah. No, understood.
But they're doing well. They're happy. They're busy. They're helping other people. They're learning. They're getting degrees. They've got a whole big beautification project there with they've a yard. They live in this place called Echo Yard, and they've got a giant mural that they've been working on. The whole point of the programs that they're involved in is to rehabilitate other criminals who do have a chance of getting out, so that they will be productive in society. So they're really giving back to their fellow inmates by participating in this program while they have no chance of getting out.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, it seems like they really are trying to do good. And I mean, I watched a Larry King interview from a very long time ago with Eric when he was asked, and this was probably back in 2006 or 7, maybe. And he was asked, do you regret what you did? Larry King asked him that. And Eric said, immensely so, immensely so. And I felt like that was incredibly truthful. He didn't have this long drawn out explanation that can sometimes feel false if you're talking too much. You know what I mean? It was just like, of course I regret it. Are you kidding me? Of course I regret it. It's just things were different back then. And I'm wondering, and it's not like you celebrated this or felt any sort of relief because it's horrific, but when Roy Rossello from Menudo came out and said this, were you just like, hey guys, I've been trying to tell you, like, look.
It's one of the Menendez miracles. I feel bad for Roy. I feel bad for anybody who was in. Jose Menendez was horrible. So even if he didn't sexually abuse you, he was horrible. But that's why I say, when people ask if I think they'll get out, I think all the pieces are in place for them to get out, but it will still take a miracle. And miracles do happen. And Roy coming forward was one of those miracles. I call it corroboration. It's the first time their story has been corroborated by someone else who experienced the same thing.
Yeah. And I feel like, Hazel, speculating, there could be more people. You don't, right? Like, you don't stop that. I feel
I don't know, but that's what I think too.
Right, exactly. And I got to tell you, so the other day when the press conference happened with DA Gascon, because I'm in media, I'll get these alerts about a breaking news headline before maybe it's posted everywhere. So I got this alert from Extra, and the headline was DA Gascon supports the Menendez brothers resentencing. It had a quote from him. It said, sources tell Billy Bush, blah, blah, blah. So I'm tweeting it. I'm putting it out there. I'm TikToking.
They pulled it.
Wait, so they pulled it. But wait, so the presser's happening. I'm seeing other headlines, but they're not the same. They're not saying he supports this resentencing. They're saying he's going to hold a press conference. Then I see the presser, and it's like, well, we haven't made a decision because we're still reviewing the evidence, but blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, dude, they jumped the gun. He probably did say he does support the resentencing and he's going to make that decision. So I'll tell you right now, I'm willing to bet they're going to be resentenced. I feel like a new trial would be cruel and unusual punishment, to be honest with you. But
people ask all the time, do I hope for a new trial? I hope to God there is not a new trial.
No.
That would be the worst way to go, in my opinion. Well, the worst would be leaving them in forever with no good reason.
Yes, exactly.
Beyond 35 years already served.
Right. And so I'm thinking like, okay, so they pulled this because it was a little preemptive. They shouldn't have ran this because, you also don't want to get their hopes up.
I don't know if they mischaracterized what he was going to say or if he changed his mind about what he was going to say. I don't know.
Ooh, I don't know. Oh no. He can't do that. It's like it went to print. You can't do that.
But what he did say, so what he said to some people was news. The people who follow the case closely know that he's had this information for a year and a half. And whether he literally has not looked at it until now or not, I don't know. I thought he was going to wait until after the election to address it. The fact. So anyway, what he did say was still encouraging, I thought.
Yeah. I did too. I mean, it's funny you bring that up. Like, you've had the evidence for a year and a half, and I said that as well. And people are like, "Oh, it's what LA is like. They have like a stat." And I'm like, "No, I'm well aware, but this is very high profile, and this would be really good for his image." I mean, judging from what I've seen, Gascon, his track record, he does seem to like to release criminals. You know what I mean? And I'm just observing. So this seems to be right up his alley. Like, it seems to be a good fit for him to release them, and it would be great publicity for him. So what? And it's the right thing to do. Let's just put that out there. It's the right thing to do.
I think it would be the right thing to do, regardless of what you think happened 35 years ago. They've done plenty of time. They've done way more than enough time. If they had been sentenced in 1994 of manslaughter, they would have served a maximum of 22 years each. Now they're 35 years and counting.
Yeah. And I cannot believe
34 years and counting.
Lyle's he's 56. I mean, he went in as essentially before his brain was even fully formed. I mean, it's insane to me. And I've been thinking about this, Hazel, and I don't know if you will agree, or I guess I don't even know how I feel about this, but if they are released, I am so fascinated and I am so interested in their lives. I think it would be cool for them to have a reality show, but I also feel bad for them. Like, that would be invasive. It'd be a weird way to live once you're, I don't know. I just feel like, what do you think? What do you feel about that? I feel like it would be interesting, but is it too invasive for them?
It's so too invasive, but it would be of interest.
And they need money, right? Like, they have to make a living when they get out.
I think it would be a terrible thing for them to agree to, but I can understand people being interested.
Yeah,
I hope there's some form of, I don't know, maybe they could start a blog, maybe, I don't know what they could do, but
podcast.
I do hope they keep people, I hope they get out. I hope they keep people updated as to what their lives are like in some way that is not as invasive as a reality TV show.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, now that I'm saying it out loud, and by the way, that was the first time I said it out loud, and
that's okay. I'm sure they would get the biggest audience ever of any reality show ever.
No, you're right.
But I also think it would be terrible for them personally to live that way.
Yeah, and that is what I thought about. But now that you said a podcast, I think you just said that. But it's like, yeah, that actually might be better because they can do it on their own terms. They can shut it off. We can still hear from them and their thoughts. And I find them both to be, Eric more so, but so well-spoken and so intelligent that I'm just like, wow, that's and now, Hazel, just my last question. I won't take up any more of your time. I've always, I've looked at this case where Eric was a bit weaker than Lyle based on their upbringing, the way their father treated them. Eric feels responsible because he went to Lyle for all of this. Do you think Lyle was quote unquote, and I don't want to say the word mastermind because it sounds like an evil plot, but do you think Lyle was the aggressor in all of this? And if so,
Lyle took charge in that he was standing up to Jose.
yes.
And I think they were both terrified in the end equally.
But there's nothing that you heard during the trial that would make you think possibly that
if I thought Lyle was a mastermind,
yeah,
that would lead itself to he planned to kill his parents, which would lead itself to murder.
right. And so you didn't feel any of that.
No.
That's really encouraging. And I don't know how much you know about the recordings from Norma Novelli. And I know that he had said certain things on the recordings about being able to lie, which obviously it's not the best look. But
I think he might have said some stupid things on the tapes, but in the end, they weren't allowed into the case. So they weren't important enough to use as evidence. It's not important whatever he said. And plus the book that she published, I forget what it's called, but it implies that he was participating in that book. He was not. He didn't know he was being recorded. He wasn't writing a book. It's not his book.
And I have to think what people don't really factor in there is your circumstances. You're in jail, you're bored, you're away, so you're going to say things and you're going to do things. And yeah, so I had thought about that. And that just took me back to like, okay, well, they've had 35 years to turn on each other and blame one another and say that this was all a lie. And they haven't. So that brings me to my conclusion that I believe they should be released. And that would be the just thing to do. And I also think I haven't really gotten as far. Is Judge Weisberg, is he still alive?
Yes.
I mean, I think he should have gotten in deep shit for his rulings on that case.
I think so too.
Yeah, very, very, very much so. I
think he still should.
But he can't be a judge anymore. He must be retired, right?
But I still think he should get in trouble for it.
Yeah, they were pretty terrible. And it was when I heard Eric say on the documentary that Leslie had a panic attack, anxiety attack over that, I believed it. I was like, wow, that was so descriptive. I honestly, couldn't even imagine being
that is the defense.
Yeah. Right.
You can't demonstrate that they killed out of fear without weeks and months of testimony to convince a jury how it is that they may have killed out of fear.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah.
Which is what we got in the first trial.
Right. Well, Hazel, just to close out here, what are your hopes for Eric and Lyle besides the obvious of getting out?
Besides the obvious, well, if they don't get out, I wish that they continue their productive and happy lives in prison as far as prison goes.
Yeah. Yeah. And Hazel, I will put everything in the episode notes about where people can find you, but what is the form of social media that you use the most that you could just shout out to everybody?
Oh gosh. Well, I'm more interactive on Facebook. But it's not a Free Lyle and Eric page. It's just my personal page.
Okay. Got it.
And I occasionally post on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok.
Yes. And you are very selective. I love it. I love it. I love it on who you interact with. So I really appreciate your time, Hazel. I've so enjoyed our conversation and getting to know your experience and you. So I thank you. And you were so wonderful in the documentary. So I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Lauren.